Hey Galen, I just wanted to follow up on this post from the Substance Forum about using SBAR files in 3ds Max and or their associated bitmaps for rendering in Corona Renderer. And I just want to highlight this sort of workflow and where the problem starts. And so basically we have a couple options. One is to import an SBAR directly into 3ds Max, and to do that we can go into Designer. We can see here we have our substance, go into the hierarchy, right click, publish SBAR, and then go into 3ds Max, substance to batch import, select our SBAR file. It will import into the Slate Material Editor. We can select the substance and then go to Substance to Corona, and it will automatically generate a shader. Now, I've already pointed this out before, but the Substance to Corona converter will not automatically connect nodes for some special parameters like an isotropy level and an isotropy angle, which you can see examples of here. I've already mentioned this before and you've acknowledged it, so I think maybe in a future version it will the substance to Corona converter will automatically consider those types of additional parameters, but that's just a side note. So you can see we have our shader here, and when I go to render it, it looks like this, and I'm happy with the result. It looks how I expect. And so the next step is that the substance implementation in 3ds Max allows users to bake outputs so that they can use those bitmaps for other purposes, other rendering engines, other TCC applications. And so if I go to this SBAR file and I select bake outputs, I can automatically generate those bitmaps and then import them individually into 3ds Max Slate Material Editor, and you can see them all right here, these ones I'm selecting. So the first thing I'd say is that there's some sort of arbitrary gamma that's being applied somewhere during that baking process that is that requires additional correction. So for example, if we look at the albedo of the auto-generated shader from the substance to Corona converter, we can see the albedo is quite dark, but when we baked our output, it produced this albedo image, which has blown out gamma, which requires an additional 0.45 gamma correction to take this, what it seems to be a 2.2 gamma, and to make it linear. So basically we're taking this blown out gamma, applying a 0.45 gamma correction, and now we get the correct gamma. Now, I don't know how many users would know that they need to do that. And this is just the albedo map. This same behavior is repeated across other maps. So for example, if we look at our anisotropy level, it's quite blown out. I mean, it's hard to tell because this is white. I mean, I know it is because I've already compared it against what's generated internally from the SBAR. And so it also requires a 0.45 gamma correction. If we go to our ANISA rotation, same thing. It requires a 0.45 gamma correction. And then even more abnormally, our normal map requires a 0.45 gamma correction, and then it can go into the Corona normal and into the normal. Now, understand that this gamma correction that's being applied here in the Corona normal, here in the Corona color correct, here in this Corona color correct, here and here, this is all additional gamma correction that's being applied. Because remember, 3ds Max internally applies a 2.2 gamma correction, and that can be adjusted per bitmap on import. So for example, if I look at this albedo map, I can go to load map, I can choose the location of the file, select that file, and you can see here I've selected a TIFF of the base color, and it's receiving an automatic gamma correction. So for example, if I selected this and I went to override, you can see it would get an override value, a linear gamma of 1.0. I could turn that down to 0.45, import that, and adjust the gamma from there. So I mean, there are ways in which you can establish or set up a import protocol such that it's automatically getting a certain gamma application, a certain gamma correction on import. But I think for most users, they're going to think that color maps need an automatic 2.2 gamma correction, and data maps like the glossiness, displacement, height, normal, those are all going to need a linear gamma of 1.0. So first of all, I guess my point is that I don't know that the average user is going to know that they need to have gamma correction, additional gamma correction being applied to the maps that are generated by the SBAR bake outputs feature. Okay, that's number one. That's the number one issue that I want to point to, is that the bake outputs procedure from the SBAR file in 3ds Max Slate Material Editor, for whatever reason, it is applying some sort of gamma correction that must then be corrected. And it requires a countermeasure, if you will, to build the shader correctly from scratch. Okay, so this is important. This is pertaining to the gamma correction. Now, even once we can figure out where that gamma correction, that secondary gamma correction, if you will, is applied, which in this case it is required on the albedo, both of the anisotropy maps, and the normal map. Once you figure out that gamma, you still have these other mix maps that you need to understand. So for example, if you look at the shader that's generated automatically using the substance to Corona converter, it has a number of mix maps here: a reflection mix, an IOR mix, a diffuse mix. I don't think the average user knows that those mix maps are necessary. For example, if they had not taken the time to kind of study this shader configuration, I think maybe if they had just exported these bitmaps from Designer and not from within the Slate Material Editor, what they would have thought is I can just plug this directly into the the diffuse channel, plug the glossiness directly into the glossy channel, plug the normal directly into the normal channel, and so forth. And that would be wrong, because as we've already shown, we need these additional gamma corrections to fix the gamma curve inside of the bitmap, and we need these additional mix maps. So for example, right here we can see that there's a mix map that's being used to blend between the diffuse channel, the base color and the metallic. That will eventually go into the diffuse channel. There's another mix map here which is blending between the metallic and the diffuse, that will go into the reflection channel. And then we have one that's blending between the metallic map and a mix curve that's going into the Fresnel IOR channel. So two additional components here that I think are probably not obvious to the typical user, which is that one, if you generate the bitmaps using this SBAR bake outputs feature, those bitmaps that are generated may need additional further gamma correction. That's one. Two, if you generate bitmaps using the SBAR bake outputs feature and use those bitmaps to generate a shader manually, you will need these mix maps also in order to do that. So I think the reason that I posted this, the reason I was trying to call it to your attention, is that I haven't seen any official documentation from Allegorithmic that shows that this additional processing is required. And so you can see though that on the right here, this is the result of the SBAR when we render it, and then on the left here, this is the result of the manually generated shader using all of these additional bells and whistles, if you will, and you can see that it's virtually identical. So a part of this is just from basically comparing against what's generated automatically by the SBAR substance to Corona converter. But again, I think for the average user who is generating an array of bitmaps from Substance Designer and then importing them into 3ds Max, they're not going to know that those maps may need additional gamma correction. They're not going to know that those maps need to be piped into a very specific mix map configuration, and even further, where those mix maps might need to go into these different components of the shader. For example, we need a mix map for the reflection, for the diffuse, and for the Fresnel. We don't need it for the gloss. We don't need it for the anisotropy. We don't need it for the anisotropy rotation. We don't need it for the normal. We don't need it for the displacement, etc. So I just think there needs to be much clearer instruction either on the Allegorithmic's website, or alternatively creating a kind of back-end option in the SBAR bake outputs feature that will, instead of automatically connecting these nodes, as you can see here, from an SBAR file, a substance file, to a Corona material, perhaps you could have an option that does this. It just generates the shader from the bitmaps automatically. So you could imagine a feature that when selected, it will not only bake all the outputs, it will bake all the outputs and then generate the shader correctly, as you see here, automatically for the user. I think that'd be a really, really powerful option, and it would help users, or it would prevent, uninformed users from all the headache of building shaders incorrectly because they didn't know that they needed some of this additional some of these additional color processing, gamma processing, mix nodes in order to make the material correctly.